Can you recall a particularly difficult concept or even in broader study that you had to explain and how you met that challenge? Whether use of simile or metaphor or storytelling technique of another kind?
Yeah, I think one of the more difficult concepts for me was, well, there's a couple. I mean, one obvious answer, and I think it's difficult to communicate, is climate change. And I remember early on in my career as a journalist, I had somebody mention that heat trapping gases were similar to leaving your automobile out, and that's why it heats up. There's if your car's out in the sun, the heat can't escape. And that was kind of a good concept for me to get started on writing about this very basic climate change. But moving beyond that, writing about things like epigenetics, which are chemical exposures that affect generations from the person exposed, which is a very difficult concept because you're talking about generations removed. And the way I got past those challenges was just talking to many different people in the field and not just one particular scientist. And they all have different ways of communicating, and eventually one of them helped, I guess. I don't know.
Well, now, what about the personality of the scientist or the researcher that you're working with? You find it important to get a bit of that into the story? I mean, scientists seem to really keep themselves separate from the science, and they concentrate on the science and the study. And you could write that way, but you try to get a little more of the humanity into that story as well. How do you do that?
Yeah, I've been trying to add more as I get older and do this more. Try to add more of I wouldn't say personality of the scientist, but try to add some of the fun parts of science. As I mentioned, kind of how they did these things. A lot of research is done in a very cool way. I mean, they're going out on boats, they're going up in planes, they're out in the woods, they're digging in the dirt. I mean, these are things that we kind of remember from science class or Bill Nye the Science Guy, and this is what people do for a living, and the findings may be kind of boring, but I think to explain how they do that is important for people to understand. It depends on the story too. Some stories you want to get straight to the point and be done with it, but some of them, I think it's just interesting for a reader to understand how some of the science is conducted.
Because they're doing some pretty interesting things.
Sure. Yeah.
And so you can use that interesting thing as a hook to get them into the story. And
sure, and it ties in with the concept that nowadays there's more opportunities for citizens to do science or be involved in some way. We did a large project on bird research, and I wrote a story about avian botulism, and almost all the research conducted on that, it starts with citizen science in northwestern Michigan. And you're seeing more of that everywhere, so if you can explain how scientists are doing that, it's a good way to get people excited about science and maybe put more of an emphasis on research funding and things of that nature.
so so the advantage of using the citizen science angle is the reader would think, well, I could do that too,
Or just interest. I mean, I think it's interesting to know that maybe your neighbors are out collecting dead birds or testing water in the river, and it's not a guy in a lab coat with Einstein hair and stuff. These are, I mean, some of the scientists, they're 25-year-old PhD students out there, and it kind of shatters the image of the guy in the lab coat who's a little bit crazy.